everybody, Death Stalker here. Well, I thought I'd talk about my very first race bike and why I hate Yamaha. Now, when I first decided to go racing, I had talked to the mechanic of the shop I dealt with a lot, and he was a former racer and had raced a long time, had all the broken bones to prove it. And he let me know at the time that he knew where I could actually buy a Yamaha TZ250H for a pretty good price. I don't remember the circumstances behind it, whether or not the guy who owned it was, you know, low on cash or hurt or whatever, but anyway, it was a pretty good deal. And these were the only real race bikes that you could actually buy. Everything else generally was a street bike that you modified for the track, a TZ or a TZ if you're American. They were built by the factory just to be race bikes. They were never intended to be anything else. And so I ended up doing the deal and getting it. And this was actually before I got my race license or had any experience in the track. And you know, I got a lot of schooling on the fact that these bikes are not reliable. They are very twitchy, especially back in those days. And the common saying about a 250 Grand Prix bike is that you know you've made a mistake when you hit the ground, because generally they give you very little warning. And I literally remember my very first crash on a GP bike. I literally had enough time to say oh. I never had time to say shit. Like, I said oh, and I was through the bubble and into the ground with a broken collarbone. So, you know, they're not a machine meant for novices, and I knew that, and it's not a big deal. I also knew they're not reliable. You know, they require constant maintenance and whatnot, and I like tinkering. And I had a guy who was a phenomenal mechanic there who was going to you know, guide me and show me what needed to be done. So again, not a problem. So I went out to the track, and I was there. It was actually a what was called a superbike weekend. It was like a big, massive, major race taking place. So I was going to be there as a support class. So I wasn't there for the big event. I was just going to be, you know, riding earlier in the day. But I showed up on Friday for the practice session, so I could get some time on the bike and get used to riding it. I got about 2 laps, and this was at Shannonville Motorsport Park near Belleville. And the first turn at Shannonville, I believe, is around a 80-mile-an-hour turn on a 250. It's actually kind of a neat corner. You tend to brake a little bit, and then you just sort of close the throttle for a second, throw the bike over, and open the throttle again. So it's you know, it's a lot of fun. And my couple laps, I was, you know, getting the hang of her. I wasn't really in people's way, and I was in the middle of the turn. You know, I opened up the throttle, the bike started to make some noise, and all of a sudden there was dead silence. And my brain basically went, there's no noise. And followed immediately by the sound of the rear tire squealing as it had locked up. And the bike had actually seized. And you know, from my motocross days, you always rode with your finger on the clutch. So basically I pulled the clutch in, the bike slipped back to where it was supposed to go, and I managed to save it. I basically ran all the way down to where it would be turn 2 before I got the bike stopped. And at the time I didn't know there was actually 2 of our top ranked superbike racers right behind me at the time, and they were actually planning on passing me coming out of the corner. And they I bet you they had to change underwear. Some of the people who were actually watching the practice session said my bike had stepped out about 2.5 feet to the left, and they were just surprised as hell that I actually was able to save it. And you know, like, it's, you know, to me, that, okay, that was racing. That's a learning experience. Okay, so the next week, you know, my bike, we took it back to the shop, and like, I was still working, so they basically they tore it apart to get a parts list to see what happened. And what happened was the a TZ has 2 cranks, a left and a right, and what happened was the left crank, the bottom end had seized. So it's basically, it needs to be rebuilt, which means just, you know, pistons, rod, and all the bearings and whatnot. So I think it was on the Tuesday I stopped off at the bike shop, and they said, well, we got good news and got bad news. And it's like, okay, well, what's the good news? Is, well, it's only going to cost $750 to rebuild your bike. And I go, okay, what's the bad news? And the bad news was Yamaha wouldn't sell me the parts. And I went, what do you mean they won't sell me the parts? And I was absolutely flabbergasted. And when I dug into it a little more, I found out that there's one guy who's responsible for all the parts in Yamaha for the race program, and apparently he makes certain all his friends get the parts and everyone else don't. And apparently he'd been doing it for quite a long time. And a lot of racers had known about it, and they were, you know, they all had very nasty things to say, but they couldn't say it to his face, because if they did, they wouldn't be able to get any more parts. And so this happened in July, my first race season, and like, I tried everywhere. The shop, they tried their connections in the US, but apparently no one wants to cross this guy because he was very vindictive. And nobody were willing to sell parts, because they didn't want to, you know, like, if some racer had sold me some spare parts he had, and this guy found out about it, this guy would be blackballed and wouldn't be able to get parts. And the part that totally pissed me off was the fact that the head guys in Yamaha knew this was going on and didn't care. And that really browned me off. So what happened was, in late September, one of the guys who was racing a Yamaha had crashed and broke his wrist, so his season was done. And he apparently had already signed a deal. He was racing Honda next year, and he sold me all of his parts for next to nothing, as sort of like a little, you know, FU to Yamaha on his way out. And we were able to get my my parts, so I actually was able to race some more. So I managed to get another couple races in, and you know, the very first race, it was it had rained all weekend long, and it was really bad out. The racetrack was, besides covered with water, was covered in worms, because they had so much rain. The worms had come up on the ground to get away from the water, and they were laying on the racetrack. So imagine driving a race bike on, you know, besides a wet track, a worm-covered wet track. And I went out. I actually had a great time. I got into a big battle with a whole whack of guys, and I either finished 7th or 9th. I can't remember, so long ago, but it was really funny. One of the guys, after the race, he came and found me, and he apologized. Said he thought he had passed me really close and it had maybe cut me off going to a corner, because he was saying, like, he said, you were so fast in a straight line, my only hope to get by you was under brakes going into a corner. And he says, I was trying for the whole race, and it was like 2 laps from the end when I finally got by you, and I was really worried I might have cut you off and you could have crashed. And I told him, oh, it's no big deal. It's like after having a bunch of 16-year-old motocross guys basically drive over you to get around you, you know, having some guy, you know, pass me kind of close was not a big deal. You know, because of that, I just won't have nothing to do with Yamaha anymore. I'm not saying they don't build great bikes. They built some pretty cool ones. You know, the TZs more or less were all pretty good bikes throughout history. But you do learn over time. There are phenomenal people in racing, and there's some very, very bad people in racing.